oh, then I made all the crystal chandeliers flash in the ceiling, and he sort of almost choked, and I started laughing. And afterwards, who's doing the lights here? I thought he was going to trash me. And he was like, you are doing the lights for my next opera. And then I was got a job in a theatre without knowing anything. So I just like go with the flow, like wherever karma sends me, I go there. So I was working in theatre for 5 years as a designer without knowing anything about design at all. And I was a very successful designer, I think, because I didn't know anything at all. So I learned my own designs. I did think that were too chased.
Zac, welcome to a conversation on writers on writing.
Thank you.
You've been doing a workshop for our creative writing students as part of this larger course on writers on writing.
Right.
The idea of the course itself is to try and see the possibility of learning from the techniques and experience of other writers, both in this kind of face-to-face format, in-person format that you've been experimenting with, but also through books, essays, conversations, and so on. And in many ways, like the writers in making that we have in our class, it's also a method to see if they can sort of reflect on their own processes in writing. So I wanted to start with something that we were talking about earlier today afternoon. That is, beginning or initial amateur writers who often have a certain pull towards a certain kind of genre, like they are interested in fantasy or romance or maybe crime or so on, or maybe certain sorts of forms, like they think they are poets or playwrights, or they want to just experiment with fiction and so on. But your own trajectory has been very vibrant and diverse. From having an initial career in theatre and music, you then went on to write in various sort of forms, fiction, travel writing, non-fiction, literary non-fiction, lyrics, scripts, and so on. So I wondered if we could begin by talking about how that kind of experimentation has been for you. And, from there, what is the sort of advice you would give young writers about being, in a way, genre agnostic, experimenting with many things?
I don't think I would call it experimentation. It's more like a kind of go with the flow sort of thing.
Right.
So I'm not like really qualified to call myself lazy because I published too many books for that.
Right.
But it's somehow it's about going with the flow, in the sense that when you try to fight your way to a career against the flow, it's like a lot of hard work. So I've always wanted to be a writer. I started writing even before I knew how to write. I would do like cartoons, and I'd tell my dad to just fill in the words, because I was illiterate at that time.
Right.
But then after I started going to school and learned writing, I very soon got into writing. And how you begin to write is always about imitating. So even the students here, if they're into a particular genre that they like reading, it's how you always start. Like, you like these kind of books, you want to write that kind of books.
Right.
So even for me, it was as a child, at first I would write children's stories. Then when I was around 13, I got into like reading Jack Kerouac, On the Road.
Right.
And I thought that, hitchhiking across America, that sounds so great.
Right.
So I wrote this pompous novel about hitchhiking in America when I was 13. I've never been to America. I knew nothing about America. But in my book, I was the hitchhiker. I was just 13 years old. My parents wouldn't, let me do anything like that. So, and of course, it was rejected by all the publishers because I didn't know anything about what I was writing about. But so I was also imitating. Then I went through some phase where I wrote Sherlock Holmes stories and that kind of thing. That of course were never published, and it was even like when I asked my chemistry teacher, for example, like how would you poison a person if you, because I wanted to have a interesting way of poisoning. My chemistry teacher got shocked and was almost about to report me to the authorities. But then I said it's just for a story, and so we talked about poisonous spiders and things like that. So I always found the process interesting, but then again, it's hard to get published. But then I was invited to do radio, so I really started in radio, and which was very good experience in radio. They tell you like you can, this much is 1 minute of talking the radio. So you learn how to get to the point very fast, and you don't waste time when you do radio. I was doing radio as as child because they wanted a child to do radio programs for other children. So as a child, I started with that. Then I sort of came into punk music, started doing music. So even though I don't do a lot of music, I've done enough music, so I still get royalties every year. They come in like it's not a lot of money, but some royalties always keep coming in from some old song I was involved in at some point of time as a composer or whatever I did on those songs. And then I somehow drifted into theater by accident because I was very much into partying and organizing parties, and I started doing light shows for those parties. And then at one party we had an opera singer performing. It was like a rave party, but for fun we had this famous opera singer. And then like when he was doing this, then I made all the crystal chandeliers flash in the ceiling, and he sort of almost choked, and I started laughing, and afterwards, who's doing the lights here? I thought he was going to trash me, and he was like, you are doing the lights for my next opera. And then I was got a job in a theater without knowing anything. So I just like go with the flow, like wherever karma sends me, I go there. So I was working in theater for 5 years as a designer without knowing anything about design at all. And I was a very successful designer, I think, because I didn't know anything at all. So I invented my own designs. I did things that were too chasey for other people to do, who were like trained designers who would do something elegant. I did something nasty, or wild or crazy or unusual at least, because I didn't know what I was doing. I just did what seemed right. So I was working like that, and then I slowly came to writing again. So all these things I did in between was in a way, I think it was good for me to do other things and get ideas about other ways of other art forms and other. I worked with a lot of people on a lot of things like film and toured with pop groups and all that. And then at some point, when I was around 25, I decided it was time to retire. I had my career. I just live in the tropics and drink a lot of beer and write books or something. And then it so happened that a publisher told me that, oh, we've heard that you're going to go to the tropics or Asia, like whatever, and would you like to write a book about it? So I had tried to get published earlier and always been rejected. Now suddenly they wanted me to write a book. So I said, yeah, I could write. And they asked me like, so do you know what an essay is as a format? I said, yeah, of course. I had no idea what an essay was. So later at home, I checked it up in the dictionary. Okay.
It wasn't the time of internet.
Yeah, you can Google.
Yeah.
So in some encyclopedia, something I read about essays, and I kind of figured. And they also asked me like, so can you take photos for your book? Are you a good photographer? I said, yeah, I'm a really good photographer. I didn't even have a camera. So I called my friends does anybody have a camera I can borrow? And so I borrowed a camera. I borrowed a typewriter from some other friend. And then I went away for 2 years and sat on a beach in Kerala writing a book. And then that became like very successful because it was very unusual. Since I didn't know anything about essays or even like travel writing. So I wrote a very different kind of book and it became very popular. So later when I was traveling, especially when I came to India, I would often see, like, if I would walk in Calcutta or I would walk in Delhi or somewhere, I would see people with that book. They would walk around reading it and looking at it.
Right.
And then I was like, oh, I'm famous. And I knew those people must be Swedish because the book was published in Swedish. So it became like a very influential book that sort of made people see Asia and India in a very different way, like a different sort of curiosity for like the culture and art, and because it's more focused on things like modern music, like heavy metal and Bollywood cinema and all these kind of the modern, whereas all other books that I published have been about the old tradition, like Bharatanatyam, ragas and all. So I was like the first one to write about what modern India is like in Sweden. And then after that, I continued writing books. And suddenly I was working for all these travel magazines and without any knowledge of journalism or anything like that. So, and they still, so it's all been on this level of like I do what I feel like doing, and people seem to like what I'm doing, so they pay me for doing what I like doing. So, but also I think it's been because I've been open to working with anything. I've not been like focused on just writing a novel. Right. And over the years, I've written many novels, but it's never been like I have to write a novel or I kill myself. Sure. But it's always been this thing. Okay, this is an interesting situation. Let me see what I can do about it. And so I work with many things. Like I do bit parts in Kannada movies. Sometimes when people ask me, I do all kinds of things. And what I try to teach is that being a writer is a kind of a holistic thing, like where you do many things, like so your life is about all these creative things. But if you narrow your scope and you're just like, if I don't get this book published, I'll surely die, then you're limiting your options because there's so many things you can do as a writer, and that ultimately in the end will actually generate money and a living. So as a career, it's a complicated choice, but if you pull it off, it works. Like there's so many people who actually are writers and live by their writing. It's not like an impossibility either. So,
but I guess this is a good philosophy to have, going with the flow and basically learning from different creative fields, which all eventually comes back into your writing one way or the other. In fact, you have experimented with multiple kinds of travel books. Your latest, or probably the 2023 publication, Digesting India, it's many things at once. It's a cultural tour of India in one way. It's a tour of the food destinations and different types of food habits and practices. It's also about literature and writers who have come from elsewhere, settled in India, and so on.
And it's about Indian writers as well.
And it's about Indian writers.
Like reading Indian writers as well.
And Indian cities. You've also previously, this one explores a lot about Bangalore and other places in the south. But you've also previously written a book of a tour through Baharij in Gujarat. I wanted to sort of think along with you, because you've also been talking about that with the students. One assumes that travel writing is easy to pull off in many ways. the sense that, okay, you would say to yourself, I
Hmm.
travel
Hmm.
and I can write, so obviously I can write a
Hmm.
travelogue.
Hmm.
But the kind of writing that has evolved with your journey,
Hmm.
I assume that it is, there are some challenges there. So I was wondering if you would want to either talk about how to write this kind of engaging
Hmm.
travel writing, which is multiple things at the same
Hmm.
time, either through a summing up kind of set of things,
Hmm.
or probably through some anecdote
Hmm.
that you remember while you were writing Digesting India, which you tried to weave in through in an interesting way,
Hmm.
which could be just a banal experience,
Hmm.
but then when it comes into this form of writing, it becomes
Hmm.
a unique thing for the
Yeah.
reader.
Well, I think as a general principle, there's the thing that okay, like going with the flow.
Yeah.
Is that, but it's not like about being lazy exactly, but it's sort of identifying the path most suitable for you, and like where the resistance might be a little bit less, and
Right.
then
Possibilities are higher.
possibilities are higher,
Right.
and so it's a bit of a strategy in that sense.
Hmm.
And so, in for example, in the travel writing,
Yeah.
it's actually as a writer you have to work hard. You have to work all the time.
Yeah.
As a writer, you're never really on holiday. Even if you're on holiday, you're sort of germinating an idea for a new project, or you're recharging your batteries in order to start again. So you're working 24/7, whatever you do. And so in the travel writing, it's also this thing that, so okay, when one travels, one goes to a lot of restaurants and eats a lot of food, often nice food, sometimes horrible food that makes you sick. And so that's also something you have to do. Otherwise, if you don't eat, you might starve and die. You know.
Yeah.
So you have to eat and do these things. So in the book, I sort of reflect on this thing of all the things I've eaten. So it becomes so even eating doesn't become an idle activity that you do just for survival, but it's eating is part of the entire travel experience. And in many cases also, there's a lot of restaurants. I mean, some across the world and even in India, there are certain restaurants and cafes that are known as writer haunts.
Right.
So in the book also I look at this a lot, like the writers foreign writers who visited India, or like Indian writers like R.K. Narayan, for example.
Right. So the Indian coffee house becomes one of those probably places where...
Yeah, Indian coffee house in Kolkata, or Koshi in Bangalore, or I try to, when I write about R.K. Narayan in Mysore, and while I'm looking for Malgudi, I'm also wondering, like, where is that dosa place located where he used to go every morning and have his morning dosa. So I'm looking at all these things, how literature, food, and all come together in a sort of a total cultural experience, which I think makes it a little bit different from your typical travel book or your typical food book, because it also has that aspect of a certain pedigree and of places where, say, like if you go to coffee house in Kolkata, then Satyajit Ray used to sit there and plan his movies. All these Bengali authors would all be sitting there and having their addas. And so you can still feel that in the air in a place like that, how closely connected food and literature is. And for me personally, also the best companion for a meal is really a book. Because if you talk with somebody, I mean, if you sit and eat with somebody and they keep opening their mouth and talking, the food will fly in your face. Often, I mean, sometimes. I mean, some people chew like that so that somehow the food doesn't go down, it goes there. But if you sit with a book, it won't spit in your face. You can close it when you feel like I'm tasting this. and then you open it and read a bit more. So it's a nice meal companion. He's quiet and doesn't talk too much. It's a transcendental experience to sit together with a good book, nice meal, and a beer in a bar or a cafe or a place like that. So I try to think of it more like that.
Experiential.
It is sort of a path of least resistance. Because anyway you have to eat, anyway you have to read, why not do it together and then write a book about it and then it becomes a bestseller because enough people have that same mentality. So one can try to force one's travel books into becoming something that they are not. Like there are people who put like rigorous ideas around how to write books. But I feel more like when I write travel stories or travel books, I don't really have a preconceived notion about what I'm going to do about it. I just go and see what happens, and then afterwards, how I can distill this into an interesting story. I usually have ideas about the story, and I always read up well, but I'm always prepared to change my ideas if I notice that something else is a better idea, if you know what I mean. So that's like so again we come to that going with the flow in a way. So I think I'm basically a Buddhist. Some way I'm kind of sailing on this river of life to wherever my karma is taking me, and I don't try to force my ideas on other people. I don't try to force things to happen that won't happen by themselves. I might sometimes, gently nudge things into the right direction. But so it's also about allowing things to happen in an organic manner, without being too rigid about it, actually. So for me, it has worked as a writer. But other writers may have different ways. They may have a very rigid
plan.
Yeah, I have to do this and then I have to do this. I think maybe V.S. Naipaul, I've only met him once, but maybe he was that kind of writer who knew what he wanted and he had decided that this is his career. I got that sense when I met him. He was a bit mischievous.
You're saying, I sense not just going with the flow, but also richly tapping on the cultural context. That's also another thing that we constantly bring up in the program and the classes, that we all are, we've grown up in certain cultural contexts, and it is interesting and important for a writer to sort of tap on that and draw from it, right? I wanted to connect this with the one genre that you have also experimented with, like a form like crime fiction, for instance, right? You have said elsewhere as well that in Sweden, crime fiction is quite a tradition. It's prolific. It's a cottage industry in itself. But when you sort of situate something of that form in the Indian context, does it take, is it very different from how it works in, say, other places? And I ask this also because I believe you've also talked to the students about how various other routes are open for the Indian writer, in the sense that they can go back to something like the rasas in Natya Shastra and capture other emotions that are, elsewhere probably not easily available. They might have other traditions. So if you look at, you probably have also read crime fiction in India in the last 2 decades. How does it compare? Is there that cultural aspect in both your writing and other writers' writing, which makes it very different from crime writing, say, either in Sweden or in other parts in Europe or US or so on? So is that cultural thing something that the young writer can tap on in many ways?
Certainly, because there's quite a lot to do in that field.
Right.
Say you can take, Sweden, for example, where I came from. It's there is a very big industry, so pretty much every town will have their own crime fiction series, and big towns like the major town will have shelves
Right.
of detective novels set in those places.
Right.
But you'll also find small towns like Mankel, whose many of his books have been made into movies. Um, writes about a small town with a population around 25,000 people,
Right. Right.
and he's said he's passed away. I knew him a little bit. He's a very fascinating person. But in his detective novels, I was sometimes thinking like you have a town of 25,000 people and then 12 detective novels with serial killers. It's a kind of a very... And then there's even smaller towns, like there's another, the crime queen of Sweden. Her name is Camilla Läckberg, and she's also been widely translated in film. She set her books in a village with a population of, I believe, around 913 people, around 10 novels with serial killers. And you'd think that that village population would be gone by now with so many serial killers.
Right.
But so when you come to India, okay, so you have some detective novels set in Kolkata.
Right.
The Bengali writers, that some of them have been translated.
Yeah.
And you can sense that, okay, they're looking a lot at Sherlock Holmes
Right.
and foreign writers. Then Bombay has its own scene of crime fiction. Some pretty good novels have been written about Bombay. Because it's a big city and there's a lot of crime reporters there who also occasionally do novels. So they have a tradition of that, and some other places has been written about. But in South India, there's not that much. And detective novels set in a particular place doesn't have to mean that it's a bad place. I mean, even if it usually involves a murder, but it's a fiction. But if you look at Bangalore, for example, so in Kannada cinema, there's a lot of gangster movies. So where they keep fighting all the time, and it's all about that gangster culture. But there's very few detective novels that are actually taken on the city like in a more literature kind of way. And in a way, detective novel is a very good way of exploring a city because, as we know, detective, it starts with some kind of crime and then ends with a solution. And in between, the detective will visit all kinds of places, five-star hotels and slums and whatever. I mean, they will go wherever they have to go to find the clues. It's an interesting way of exploring a city. And so when I started writing, it was a bit, for me, partly an exploration of the city, more than a career in crime fiction. It was more about my own, learning new things and finding out things I'm curious about, and then sort of. There's that statement by the architect Frank Lloyd Wright: "Form follows function."
That's right.
So it automatically became like that. Not so much that I was trying to become a famous detective novelist. It just happened that I became, and now in universities, people are writing papers on my books, analyzing what is he saying, like what are these books meaning. As if I'm some kind of a Nobel Prize winner or something. But it's easy to have captured something that people really enjoy. And there's been a lot of Kannada filmmakers over the years who want to make movies out of the books, which is nice because I also have found a lot of inspiration in Kannada cinema and so now there's a director who's working on doing the first Majestic novel as a movie.
So I have to ask, what was the birth of Hari Majestic? Were you at all inspired by any of the Indian, legendary fictional detectives like Feluda or Vyomkesh Bakshi, or even maybe in the last one decade, Vishpuri, last 2 decades, Vishpuri Tagenhol, or Sujata Messi's character also, Parveen Mistry has
not
been.
at all. I wanted to write something original, something that wasn't derivative of the Sherlock Holmes character.
Right.
And
so what's so unique about Hari in a way?
Well, he is more derivative of Kannada cinema than of some foreign prototype. Than and like you mentioned, Natya Shastra. So I wanted to write a book that follows these dramatic rules of Natya Shastra that are also mirrored in modern Kannada cinema and Hindi cinema as well. And most Indian cinema traditions are have clear links to Natya Shastra and the way you can mix registers, like combine humor and romance with the action. So, for example, you can have, Uppi. I love Uppi's film, Upendra's movie. And you can have him doing a movie where he's this macho hero, but he also has this sort of tender, romantic side to him. And he also cuts jokes like anything, no? Like he'll put on his sunglasses and say, or take off the mouth and say, "I'm taking off my cooling glasses to see you better." Like he'll say that like that, or he'll take a BD and take the filter from a cigarette and filter BD. He's great at this sort of making funny at the same time as he's a fantastic cinema hero. So it's more about, I think, being closer to that sort of aesthetic than trying to rip off some Western prototype and just sort of bang it into Bangalore situation. So I think I may have been a little bit successful in that. So these other writers, I feel like Talking Hall and all
continue with that older tradition of.
It's okay what they write, and I mean, I planted the idea in Talking's head that he should write a Delhi
Punjabi,
so we were sitting in a bar in Defense Colony and talking about it. He was so tired of working as a foreign correspondent for whichever newspaper he was working for, and he was telling me about different stories he had been done on illegal gambling, for example. And I said, why don't you try writing a detective novel instead? Because that's what I'm doing. And he was first he was looking at me kind of strange, but then 1 or 2 years later, the first Vishpuri book came out, so I think he was listening attentively. Nice fellow, Talking Hall. But I like his travel writing more than his fiction. I mean, he's not really a fiction writer.
Right. But it's interesting in the sense that, it connects back to what we were saying earlier, that your hero is truly a product of Bangalore,
son of the
Karnataka, son of the soil.
In a way. I mean, he's an idli, vada, sambar, filter coffee type of hero.
I guess then this is probably something that probably all young writers wonder about. From the time that you told us that you thought of writing from probably a very young age, right? But as
young, I don't know, 5, 6. Is that young?
Yes, that would be considered young. But once you were older and you had decided that I do want to become definitely a writer.
I had decided by 5.
You had decided by 5.
Yeah,
probably
4,
my
maybe.
question might not even, I might still ask it. which is
My
that.
dad had a typewriter, no? So
Right.
I would climb up to it when I was very small in the thing. I didn't know
Right.
how it worked.
So let's say from the time that you were 5
Mm.
to the time that you actually experience what you call success of
Mm.
any kind. Let's say you
Mm.
had a published book which sold very well or got good reviews and so on. I could of course ask, how long was that? But how was that experience? Like, how do you survive that experience? Because obviously success comes easily to some people, but with difficulty to others.
Yeah.
How was it for you?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question when you put it like that, because in a way, that novel I wrote when I was 13 had been
That's a hit.
not rejected,
Yeah.
and it had been published and actually become successful.
Yeah.
I would have probably been a pompous ass by now, or dead from
From all the
too soon, too fast, this thing.
Yeah.
So it's good. It was a gradual process, but for me, so success has been like the first time you hear yourself on the radio.
Yeah.
I was 13 or 14 when I was working in broadcast. So I mean that's fantastic. You switch on the radio, and instead of all these pompous fools, it's you, the genius. Or like the first time you're publishing some small magazine, you may not even be paid, but your text is there for other people to read. So eventually when my first book was published, I was probably around 27. So I had been,
At it for some time.
yeah. And then
did you say at some point that this is not working out? I might as well give up.
the writing.
Yeah.
I mean, there were periods when I was doing other things like music and all. But music also, it's when you're on stage, you climb up on the speakers and do like this, and people are there. And that's also a form of success.
Yeah, true.
But it gets boring, you do it night after night. You tour some country or something, and you do it every night. You're like, it gives you a kick. But a book is more like I mentioned my first book, which was published in Sweden, but it was about Indian culture. And then when I saw all these people walking around with it, I mean, that to me was very revealing. There was even one time I was staying in some hotel in Bombay, which was a kind of an obscure hotel. So somehow there was some Swedish girl also staying there. So she started talking to me because she realized I was also speaking Swedish. And so she asked me, how do you know about this hotel? Because I just read about this in this book by Zac O'Yeah and found it. I wouldn't have found it otherwise. I told her, I am Zac O'Yeah. He was like, she almost had a nervous breakdown. And so it's like that kind of thing.
Sure.
Or as a travel writer, sometimes I come across these situations like there's some restaurant in Mysore. I had gone there for a literary festival, and there's a restaurant where they do this ragi mudde and mutton, these local dishes. I quite liked it. I had been there a couple of years back, and I wrote about it in one of my travel stories that they have. It's a fantastic, one of the best ragi muddes you can get. And then when I went there last year, and I had gone for the Mysore Lit Fest to speak. And the festival, the buffet is its usual buffet food. So I thought, let me just walk over to that place and see if it's still there. And it was kind of an old house, like the Mysore type bungalow house. And to my surprise, it was still there, and it was full of customers. And doing great business. They had got fans on the ceilings and a lot of staff and all. So I had a really nice meal there, and then I went to the counter to pay. I saw big sign behind the counter recommended by Zac O'Yeah. And so I realized that because I recommended, they had managed to survive and grow, and become popular. And so as I was about to pay, I pointed out, I am Zac O'Yeah. And the guy
Did
said,
they
you
waive
have
off the
to
bill?
pay anyway. So, but I was sort of happy to see that, I mean, it's always this thing like, if you write something, a book or a story, and it actually means a lot for a lot of other people. It actually has a, physical effect on a situation like a restaurant that might be doing poorly. I write that you guys should try this, and suddenly they are doing good business. So I think that aspect of writing and fame has, to me, been more important than signing a lot of autographs. It's like really that feeling you get that I am changing the world. I'm not saving the world, I'm just changing. Saving the world is a bit too much for me.
Right. No, that's a wonderful note to sort of, we could go on with this conversation, but you have actually touched upon something like the writer's philosophy in this idea of going with the flow and enjoying that process.
And doing something good at the same time.
Doing something good at the same time. And in a way, the writer's process in subtly learning from many things around you and sort of trying hard to incorporate that into one's work.
I think also one last important point is that also the thing about learning from other writers, like a collegial, it's a very collegial world. Like, so if you're friendly with other writers, like older writers, and respect them, they will teach you things. And that's why I'm coming here to teach and talking to your students here.
That's right,
because I want to teach them what I've learned, so that they can become better writers. Because other older writers have always taught me and pushed me in the right direction. Like great writers like Amitav Ghosh have been a great help to me in my career in various ways. Like sometimes just by saying that, Zac, maybe you should do, so people have always been helpful. So I also try to be helpful. So in the writing community, I think that's a very important thing of helping each other, because otherwise you're so lonely as a writer. And then on the other hand, I noticed there are other writers, like if you ask them, like, who's your agent? They'll be like, I don't want to talk about it. Or can you connect me with some editor? They'll be like, no. As if that's going to ruin their career to be a little bit friendly. So I've been telling your students, like, if you write this text and you want to get connected to some editor, I'll do it. So I think that sort of generosity to other writers of teaching all your secret tricks and technical things, it doesn't harm me. Like if your students learn from me, it's great if they become better writers, and there's a lot of more better writers in the world. And I mean, I have my career. It's I just want like more better writers in the world, and that writers should have like a nice community feeling where you share with each other and help each other out editing your books and things. So that's basically I've been trying to teach that in a way, like work with each other, because you learn so much from each other as writers. So so that's also a very important thing to think of. Because other people have this idea that the writer is a lonely wolf, a solo person. I've never had that feeling. It's all a big community. The editors, the writers, we're all working together. We're not in the same company or same university campus or anything like that, but we are in the same ecosystem. So some writers are like that. They like to support everyone else, and if I get in touch with them, I'm very happy if they help me, and then in turn I help other writers like your students here. If they need help.
So we are really honored and grateful to have had you here. and I'm sure we have had a wonderful time
You're
learning
not sure,
from you.
or you're sure?
I will have to. I'm sure they have had, and I have yet to hear a lot about it in the coming days and weeks. So thank you very much, Zac, for both being here and for this conversation. And we hope to have you back again sometime soon.
Yeah, sure. Whenever I'm
Right.
happy to help out
Thank
other
you.
writers.